Thank you. What if you were the victim of a crime? And I don't mean a property crime. I'm talking about a brutal attack where you were assaulted physically, emotionally, sexually, and spiritually by someone you thought you knew, someone you loved and you thought loved you. And through that attack, through the threats and the insults and the violence, you held on. You survived and courageously decided to seek support. So you head to your local crisis center for insight and guidance and resources. But when you get there, no one's there. You go to law enforcement because you have concerns for your safety and fears. And to your surprise, when you get there, no one's there. So you go to the courts seeking justice and protection. And once again, no one is there. If we don't figure out a way to stop this mass exodus of professionals who work with victims and survivors of trauma, this will be the reality that we face. And I know a lot of people can say, Miiko, with institutions that big, we're talking courtrooms and hospitals and police stations, there's no way that those buildings go empty, no matter how bad the labor shortage is. Someone will always be there. And I say to that, you're right. Someone will physically be there. But when I talk about the risk that survivors run of no one being there, I don't mean in the literal sense. I'm talking about those that are disconnected, dispassionate, disengaged, and doing a disservice. Trauma professionals too burnt out to be truly present. And while we know there are many reasons why people leave their professions and their positions, but high on the list, always, is burnout and the effects of secondary trauma. So what are we missing? Right? Because we all know that self-care is very important. We've sat through work presentations, we received those emails sporadically, and had awkward pep talks that says self-care is very important. Yet we are still here. As a prosecutor, I handled violent crime. I worked with those who were suffering trauma and had suffered a lot of trauma. Domestic violence, sexual assault, human trafficking with both adult and child victims. I saw graphic photos, watched videos so sick that describing it to you feels like a crime. I spoke with victims who were still reeling from violations that are too disturbing to repeat. Day after day, trauma after trauma, case after case. And I want to share with you one case, one of many, that made a lasting impact. Maya and her story. Maya was a young girl who was beautiful. She had bright eyes and an even brighter smile. She had the kind of personality that was bubbly. She was funny and magnetic. She held the unique position of being the class clown and the teacher's pet at the same time. And as Maya matured, it was not unusual for perfect strangers to come up to her and tell her how pretty she was. Maya had an interest in becoming a model. So for her 18th birthday, she was gifted a professional photo shoot where she used those photos to land her first modeling job with an out-of-town agency. However, when Maya arrived, she wasn't met by a talent agent or some scout. she was met by a brutal sex trafficker who assaulted her in ways that I won't describe and trafficked her state to state to state. Maya was eventually returned home, but when she was, that beautiful face was now marred with bruises and scratches, and those bright eyes fell flat and weak. Maya's story is like so many stories that came across my desk, unfortunately. The difference, though, with Maya is that her story, she didn't come across my desk. I know the details of her stories because I'm her mother, and she was trafficked, victimized, while I was a prosecutor. The professional trauma that I had seen on a day-to-day basis had now invaded my personal space, and it taught me lessons that I did not want to know. It taught me, one, that my daughter is resilient as hell, that she is still beautiful, and she is gracious enough to allow me to share this story. But it also taught me, it also taught me about that missing piece, about how to support the professionals who take care of survivors. And the only way to do it is to have a whole person approach. And a whole person approach requires connection. It requires dialogue, and it requires input and action. And I know that sounds exhausting. But how exhausting is it to always be on the brink of burnout, or to perpetually always be understaffed? Now I work retired from prosecution as an attorney advisor and a consultant. And I speak with professionals all throughout the country, and their stories echo mine. I worked with a woman whose job it was to find support and resources for those who were struggling from addiction. And in our initial conversation, she shared with me how difficult it was, heart-wrenching, for her to work with people and see them struggle and relapse when she had invested time and truly cared about them. But once I shared Maya's story with her, she confided in me that she also has a son who's suffering from alcoholism. And the compound effect of everything she's dealing with leaves her feeling overwhelmed and completely submersed in trauma. I spoke with another gentleman who told a similar story about the difficulties he was having trying to deal with the mental health issues that his teen daughter was struggling with and her suicidal thoughts. That he was frustrated that while he provides resources, it seems like none were provided to him. Victims advocates reeling from grief to the point where it's difficult for them to speak to me because they are fighting back tears. When we compartmentalized wellness and made it employee wellness, we fail to acknowledge that arriving at work is not like getting in a magical coach that somehow turns into a pumpkin at the strike of midnight. We don't completely transform into another person when we clock in and clock out. The responsibilities, the stress, the energy that we have in our everyday life and work life, that lingers. And it bleeds through this fictitious line that we drew to separate these two worlds. We are each a whole person. So in order to turn the tides and get a complete solution for a problem that is really apparent in so many different professions, we have to embrace the whole person approach. And I'll start with organizations and where organizations can start. Organizations, first thing, you need to make this your priority. And I want to break that down. Your priority, meaning you need to own this issue and own the solution. There is a legal term that comes up in court called burden shifting. And it applies when someone, say the prosecution, is responsible for proving a particular fact, but we kind of shift that burden to another party. That's what's happened when it comes to wellness. The over-reliance and overemphasis on self-care has been incomplete and got us incomplete results. We need organizational care. And when it comes to making this a priority, it just needs to be apparent and inform every action that organizations are taking. Next, we need to build partnerships, because no one expects an organization to master all these different angles and different instances that come up in a person's life, let alone many people. That's not a reasonable expectation. So we need those partnerships. They need to be community-based, and they need to be driven by the members of that organization. And then finally, we need to put resources behind it. Funding matters. There was a journalist, Ida B. Wells, who courageously reported on vicious acts of violence and posthumously received a Pulitzer Prize. And she said it best when she said, "A cause without coin is just a conversation. Invest or it's empty talk." So invest in your people. And then to the workers, the professionals who do this work day in and day out. The first thing I want to say is thank you. I don't think people understand that so many in that population has suffered trauma personally and then decided to go back and help someone else walk through it. So what I say to those professionals is that I need you to advocate for yourself the same way you advocate for the people you serve, because you deserve the reality and not an illusion of off-duty. Thank you.